Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. We're going to have a conversation about what is Guru Nanak's original declaration. Sikh tradition calls it Mangla Charan, some people call it Mul Mantar. For our purposes, we'll say it's the invocation, his original declaration. And this is not about philosophically locating it in the Indic tradition or the Semitic traditions. Actually, each generation and anyone who's trying to understand what Guru Nanak meant has to explore it in their own vocabularies. So in that regard, in that context, I share what I have learned to date. So the idea is IkOankar, and it's actually not an idea. This is his experience. When Guru Nanak says IkOankar, it's something like it's an all-pervasive and a creative force of the world. The one digit in front actually makes it that this is an affirmation of life. This is not about dualities of life. This is not even about negation in things. So I like to interpret that if this is the idea, and this is the idea I want to bring in my lifestyle, what does that mean? It means I need to see everything in oneness. I need to not entertain any racism or sexism, the biases which are based on men who have created these rules. So the idea of IkOankar is, then am I able to become as vast and as loving, as grand as IkOankar is, the force in the world? And Guru Nanak Sahib then explores all these in 7 different phrases. And after he explains that, he gets into the first quality which we reflect on is Satna. That's the first quality. We are identifying with eternal principles. Something which is eternal, whose identity is eternal, whose not just name, name's purpose is for identity. And Sat is not just truth, Sat is something which is eternal. And we identify with that eternal force. What does that mean to me? It means that eternal principles are the ones am I invoking when I have to make decisions in life. Whether it is about relationships, whether it is about conversations in community, or what we call in the affairs of the world, be it political or economical. Are we operating with eternal principles, or are we operating for time-bound ideas, which is what is usually causing problems in the world? The second quality he's talking about is kartā purakhu. Now, kartā purakhu is creative being, creativity in the being. If this is the quality I want to bring within me, and Guru Nanak Sahib, because kartā is creator, what does it mean to become creative? The creator and creation and Sikhi are one. We don't see this differentiation because everything is one. And which means that in my approaches in life, am I producing or addressing issues or tackling issues, again, be it personal or be it panthak? Am I tackling them with creative ideas as well, or every time they're about just confrontation or physical fight or putting people down? Because creative being, the creative personality is implying I must become that creative personality in my approaches towards life. Third one Guru Nanak quality is Guru Nanak Sahib is invoking is nirbhau, which is how we are transcending our fears, we are going beyond our fears. Nir is without and bhau is fear. Actually, this idea of we don't entertain any fear, that's why Guru Nanak is able to stand in front of an emperor as well as in front of the religious leaders of the time and have any conversation, including very tough political conversations when he witnessed the atrocities, what we now call genocidal campaigns, because there is no fear. Now, what does that mean to me? It means if I bring this quality in me, even in the way I invoke IkOankar, I must not be doing it out of fear, because most of the religiosities these days are based on fear. In fact, many of them say we fear quote-unquote God. But Guru Nanak Sahib is saying, I am fearless in my approach. I'm fearless in my attitude. I'm fearless in the way I make things actionable. That's nirbhau. Next comes nirvairu. Nir again is without, and vair is this enemy idea, this animosities we carry. Because we do othering all the time. The way I understand this is that if I have actually understood IkOankar's this particular attribute or quality, what that means is, if I've understood it and if I want to practice it, that means I actually do not perceive any being on this earth, all 8 billion of them, they're not my enemy, because they have the same divine force within them. They have the same divine potentialities. So how do we deal with this issue of why do people do what they do? Because they are not realizing that potential. So the enemy is not the individual. Enemy is the issue. Enemy is the stance we take. And that's why what we like to say, we need to separate the individual from the actions they are taking, the approaches they have developed. So one way to practice this will be to not perceive any individual as being an enemy. Maybe the way to look at it is their adversaries, or they're opposing your idea. So not focusing on the individual, but focusing on the issue at hand. Fifth one is akāl mūrati. This idea of timeless or deathless form, which is formlessness actually. And that's where we become not fixated on a particular era or time, including the idea of God. The way I understand this is, we have fixations on things. We have fixations on the idea of God. We have fixations on the idea of what we call now iconicizations. And what Guru Nanak Sahib is doing, can we go beyond this idea of fixation? This is how I understand this. Our ideas need to be timeless because the divine is timeless. And we cannot be fixated on the current phenomena of things only. The current phenomena or my current mood or my current psychological state may be telling me, my particular understanding, but my actions, my approaches must become timeless. They must not be fixated on one or other things. That's the akāl mūrati. And then the sixth idea, which Guru Nanak Sahib is sharing, is ajūnī. This idea of transcending what we today call gendering, the life and death cycles, which is we are going beyond thinking in consequences. Ajūnī is literally ajūnī, opposite of Junes, opposite of this idea of life forms. The divine is presented, IkOankar, the force, the creative and pervasive force of the world is presented as being beyond this idea of taking life and birth. So what does that mean now when I apply that as a quality? It means this is understanding that none of the ideas can be fixated based on our understanding, our biological understanding, our racial understanding, our gender understandings, because the divine is beyond all of these things. They might be our roles, they might be our particular birth or adopted identities, but being ajūnī means transcending all of that when we are dealing with humanity at large, when dealing with our relationships. And the seventh thing Guru Nanak Sahib mentions is saibhaṅ, that at some point in our lives, we are living a personal experience of the divine, not the borrowed understandings and repeating them and cutting and pasting them. Saibhaṅ is self-illumination, literally, but what really it means is that I have a particular experience of the divine which is not borrowed anymore. I have enough self-knowledges and enough deeper wisdom and enough personal experience of the divine, so I'm not constantly quoting a book or a particular expert or a particular YouTube video which we lately saw or a podcast I liked. Those are our data points. At some point in our lives, in a development, in a relationship with IkOankar, we must have a personal experience of the divine. That's what saibhaṅ is. That's the self-fulfillment of our relationship and understandings. So you have the idea of IkOankar, which Guru Nanak Sahib starts the declaration with. And then you have 7 qualities that those are the chiselings we do in our life to bring those divine attributes within us. And after we have done that chiseling, when we have become like the IkOankar, that's the Gur prasādi. This is the receiving of the grace. So IkOankar is the force which is universal and pervasive and creative. Gur prasādi is how we become like that by doing these 7 things, inculcating those behaviors. We like to call them meditating on them, reflecting on them. It's actually allowing our behaviors to become like that. Gur is Guru. Guru is wisdom. Wisdom is something which takes you from ignorance to enlightenment. And prasādi is this idea of grace, which is a very universal idea. And what Guru Nanak Sahib is invoking here is, if we do those 7 things which are mentioned, and we understand them and bring them in our lives, those are the qualities I have inculcated because I've understood that to be the divine, then this is how I perceive the grace. In fact, then I'm ready to receive the grace. So grace is not exclusive to any individual. Grace is not something which can only be given if you're in a particular space or a particular religiosity or a particular gender or particular religion. No. Guru Nanak's idea of disrupting the whole idea of grace is, if you become like the force, and you do that by bringing these 7 qualities within you, this is how you are receiving the grace. This is how you have an intense relationship with the beloved, which is the force of the world, and that's what brings us like the divine. So in the Sikh conception of divinity, as Guru Nanak presents it, he's actually saying we are not here to worship the divine, we are actually here to become like the divine. And this is what divine is to Guru Nanak. This is my understanding as it's evolving in the contemporary phenomena in the vocabularies of today. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.